Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe another 30 seconds to a minute just to give folks some time to connect.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
My good luck number on my phone, 333.
Perfect.
Just gonna put this on silent.
Okay. Looks like we're getting some folks joining us, which is great.
Heck. Hi, friends. Trying to see if I don't have a copy of my own book, but you can hold it. It can be our display case.
Well, she's at home.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
I have other people's books. I just don't have my own right now. I have books that I'm reading. If anyone wants to see those.
We always love, I like, we had another virtual event with an author, and she had a bunch of copies of her book, but translated into different languages.
That's lovely.
So you got to see how the cover changed from country to country. And then she had just selected a bunch of books that she was currently reading, and she's like, I have to show these to you guys. And
I love it. Well, we can chat about that, because I'll definitely tell you what I'm reading.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, so 3:34. I'm gonna say maybe we get started.
Great.
Okay. So the thing I do want to note for everyone is that Rebecca does have an event right after ours, so we want to wrap up by 4:30. Perfect. Okay. So the way I was thinking things would go today is I would ask Rebecca a couple of questions that I came up that are kind of vague.
Sure.
And then I would turn it over to patron questions, and hopefully we have enough patron questions. If not, I have extra questions that I can always bring out if we need them. But hopefully you guys have way more questions, because that's way more fun than listening to me ask questions.
Do you I'm still honestly, guys, I'm so untech savvy. I'm still figuring out Zoom. But does everyone have a window, or are you seeing people? Are there people on just the main? I don't even know how to ask the question I'm asking.
Yeah, so for Zoom, there's a lot of different options on what you can see. So there's some buttons where you could literally have a gallery view of everybody.
Oh, I see. I just clicked down. I see. I'm looking at you now, which I like, because that I can focus and pay attention. But I was like, oh, I want to see who else is here. Okay.
Right, exactly. So you could gallery view it, or there's an arrow and you can scroll through, and then you can have a main screen and then a gallery up top. So totally flexible.
Hi, Tina and Amanda. Okay.
Okay, so I'm Chaslyn, and I'm the Library Programs Associate for the Upper Skagit Library. Hopefully we've got Upper Skagit Library patrons here as well, but we did have an invitation for everybody in Skagit County and libraries there. So if you're from one of the other libraries, hi friends, come visit us sometime. And we are talking today with Miss Rebecca Serle, who is a author of multiple books and also television writing as well.
True.
And so notable entries in her writing works are The Dinner List, The Edge of Falling, and When You Were Mine, and this recent release called In 5 Years. And if you'd like, Miss Rebecca, would you want to give like a really brief teaser for what In 5 Years is about?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Serle, author of In 5 Years. And In 5 Years is a story of a young corporate lawyer, Danny Cohen, living in New York City, who has like a very airtight vision for her life, thinks she knows exactly what she wants for her life. And we meet her on the day of her like big giant job interview, the place she's wanted to work forever. She nails it, of course, that she gets engaged to her boyfriend. Everything's going according to plan. And then she falls asleep on her couch and she wakes up and lives exactly 1 hour from 10:59 to 11:59, 5 years in the future. And she wakes up in an apartment she's never been before with a man she's never met before. She wakes back up in her normal life, thinks that must have all been a dream, and then 4.5 years go by and she meets the man who was in that hour with her, and then everything starts to sort of unravel and ravel together to bring her towards that hour. So that's the In 5 Years elevator pitch. It's really a book about all the books that I write are really about the dialogue between fate and free will, how much is in our control, how much is going to happen regardless of what we do, and sort of the conversation between those two things. And it's also, as a lot of my books are, as The Dinner List definitely is as well, a book about female friendship and the importance of female friendship and the intensity of female friendship. So.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I really noticed when I read through it was the relationship between, so Danny is the main character and her
Mhm.
friend is named Bella.
Yes.
And their relationship was, even though it was platonic, it was just as equal or more important than the romantic relationships, which is, it's sometimes that's a little bit weird for fiction. We've gotten so used to writing romantic relationships as the core of a story. So I absolutely adored the fact that Bella and Danny, that was it.
I'm so glad because it's how I really feel about my own life. I mean, I think that the female friendships I have and the women who are in my life are just like tantamount to my happiness. They are the foundational relationships, even with romantic relationships in my life, and we are in each other's lives. And I just think it's such a sort of like sacred bond, and one that I don't often see. Um, like one I don't often see that people pay a lot of tribute to in fiction. And so I like to do it because it's important in my life, and I mostly just write what I know.
Perfect. So when did you start writing, and what kind of made you really fall in love with the craft?
I am always really fascinated when I meet people who say, "Oh, I started writing when I was, 30, or I started writing when I was 40, or I started writing." I feel like I was born a writer. It's just I have always done it. I cannot remember a time before I was writing. I was like, as soon as I learned to like put words on a page, which I learned how to write and read extremely late. I was like almost in the third grade, I think, because I went to sort of an alternative education school. Um, and my parents were like really freaked out because they were like, she has to learn how to read, she has to learn how to write. Cut to, it's what I do for a living, so it all works out. But I always, it was something that I always loved, and I really just kind of fell in love with the idea of getting to like organize language in a way to make people feel and to bring about feeling. I write to make myself feel, to figure out how I feel about my own life, and to make others feel. It's why I read also. So it's just always been like inherently a part of who I am. I think if you ask me who I am, I say I'm a writer. So it was always there. And when I was in middle school and elementary school, I would like enter some writing competitions, and I did that just sort of like with other schools. It was always just very much a part of my life. And then when I went to college, I was a English and creative writing major. And then I moved to New York and got my master's degree in creative writing at the New School in New York, and simultaneously was writing my first novel, a book that remains in a desk drawer and will stay there forever because no one should ever see it. And I sold my first novel, which was a book called When You Were Mine, that we actually just reissued. Where we just reissued it with a new cover, and I did some editorial and I wrote a letter. I sold that a year after graduation from my MFA, and I've been writing full time ever since.
That's exciting.
I'm very lucky. I'm extremely lucky. I mean, I'm very lucky because I'm not good at anything else, so I don't really know what I could possibly be doing if it wasn't for this. So I'm very grateful it worked out.
Right, absolutely. So you started with novels, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When did television writing start happening?
So I started off writing young adult. So my books, When You Were Mine and The Edge of Falling, which you mentioned, are both YA. And then I had this idea for a young adult series called Famous in Love. And I wrote two books in that series, Famous in Love and Truly Madly Famously. It's about a young woman who gets plucked from obscurity to star in the next major feature film franchise based on a best-selling book series. So like Twilight or Harry Potter or Divergent or any of those. And as I was writing the book, I thought this would make a really great and interesting television show. It's like the thing, I grew up on old WBTV, Dawson's Creek, and Gilmore Girls, and it was something I would have loved to watch. So I ended up writing the pilot with the support of my manager, and we sold it to Warner Brothers. And then I was all of a sudden in Los Angeles, which is where I currently live, but I was living in New York for 4 years. The pilot got picked up, and then season one got picked up, and then we did season two. So all in all, that adventure was like 4 years. But I kind of sideways into it because I wrote this book series, and then I ended up writing the pilot myself, and then sold it, and it went from there. It was a very interesting experience, and like quite unusual, although less so now. I think 5 years later, a lot more authors are getting involved in their adaptations, but at the time that it was happening then, it was quite unusual.
So when you write for novels versus when you write for TV, um, how similar is your process for each, or how different is your process for each?
I think that for me, the process of writing is similar. I think the process of approach is entirely different. So when I approach a novel, I have usually like the conceit of an idea, and then I'll kind of like just see where it takes me. I'll maybe outline very, very mildly like the first 30 pages, but I never have a clear plan. In fact, the book I'm writing right now, I just realized how it's going to end yesterday. I've been like jostling back and forth between these two possibilities, and one time I thought it was this, another time I thought it was that, and I wasn't sure. With a script, you have to know, for so many reasons, because there's so many other parties involved, because production is complicated, because so many other reasons, you have to have, there's no room to explore in narrative, because you're working within like a very specific and particular framework. So when you approach, even when you're writing a pilot, or network and no one's attached yet, you still have to be realistic in terms of how long a script is, what needs to happen, understanding that if you're writing, you know, a 1 hour drama, there are commercial breaks, and there are certain like act outs and moments and inciting incidents that need to happen at certain like minute markers. So it's far more mathematical, I would say, than writing a book. Now, I would guess, I've never done this before, but I would guess that if you looked at all of my books, you would probably begin to see some kind of a narrative, some kind of a structural pattern, right? Like when an inciting incident happens, when there's a climax, when there's an all hope is lost, like I think you would probably find that, but I don't write with any of that in mind when I write a book, and I write with it in mind at the forefront when I write a script, just because you have to.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So for in 5 years,
Yeah.
from beginning when you were just sort of started planning it out to,
Yeah.
wow, I'm holding this in my hands, how long did that take?
It was so quick. This one was really fast. I started the book in August. I finished a draft in, I think, November. And we sold it in March.
Wow.
So we sold it in March, and then and then it came out 1 year later, a little less than 1 year later. So about a year on that process. And it was extremely, extremely fast. My first book, I think, took over 2 from the time I sold it to when it ended up coming out. So this one was really quick.
Okay.
I don't know what that means. I hope I can repeat it. We'll see. I don't know. But this one was very fast. I tend to draft books very quickly. Editorial can take me, you know, anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. The Dinner List, I wrote the first 100 pages of, then went to Los Angeles, did Famous and Love for 4 years, came back to New York, found the first 100 pages on my computer, and then finished that book. So every book has like a little bit of a different timeline, but the first draft tends to happen pretty quickly.
Okay. So are you someone who when you're writing, do you plan every detail out, or are you just like, let's write it and go and let's just see what happens, and I'm even surprised?
Yeah, let's write it and go. I mean, to be honest, the best parts of writing are when they feel like reading, when you're waiting to figure out what happens next. And plotting, I've always found, really kind of like drains the story of that for me. So I don't plot. I mean, maybe it would be better if I did, I don't know, but it's not really a tool in my toolbox. My toolbox is filled with more sort of like spontaneity. I write from a place of more like intuition than like methodical thinking. That's not to say either one's right or wrong. It's just how I approach writing.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So, the inspiration for In 5 Years.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
So I think I said at the beginning of our chat, like I've really been interested in this dialogue between like fate and free will. And my last novel, The Dinner List, is really about, I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's really about getting to sort of go back in time and relitigate the past and sort of see if you could have chosen life differently. And this book is really about the fantasy of getting to see what's coming. I also had like a very odd psychic prophecy about my love life that came back around in a way that was very different than what I thought it was. And just the spark of that idea started me thinking about I just had this phrase in my mind, which was like, oh, even if we can see what's coming, we can't see what it will mean. And I think that that's really one of the major ideas and like a major thesis of In 5 Years is the idea that like that hour that she lives, and I'm not spoiling anything by saying this, but that hour she lives at the beginning is exactly the hour that she lives at the end of the book. It's just, it has an entirely different context. So it means something entirely different than what she thought it did. And I think that idea is really interesting and compelling to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it worked. When I got to that part in the book, I just kind of had to stop and go, oh, you got to be kidding. This is happening, and I love it.
I'm so glad.
Okay, so the last question I have before I'm going to send it off to patrons. Is there a huge difference between draft 1 and, the final draft? And how did you kind of decide what stayed and what went?
Yes. So in 5 years, there wasn't a huge difference. That book was what I call cut cleanly. Like it just sort of like it came out clean. Now there are books that there are books that you have to tear apart and completely put back together again in order to work. The Famous Love series comes to mind, and they were much better for it, having done that. This book came out pretty clear. So there aren't major things that I could tell you that changed. I think that my first drafts always tend to be really like slim and pretty slight. So my work in subsequent drafts is always to fill them out. Like the first drafts can almost read a little bit like outlines just because they're so short and condensed. So my work is really to like go in strategically and kind of like open up the world, open up scenes. But in terms of plot, I don't think that anything major in this one changed. So I think what you're reading is probably what was there more or less in the beginning.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I have one question in the chat, which I'll ask, and then what we'll do is, if you go into on your screen, if you go into the for everybody, and
okay.
to ask you a question, sorry. If they click on the participants button, it pops up a window, and there's another button called raise hand. And so what you do is you click the raise hand button, and it puts you in a queue. And then we will be able to one at a time select you and turn off your mic or turn on your mic so that you can ask Rebecca a question. And that way it's not everyone trying to do it all at once. It's just, one at a time. And for this first round, let's do one question. And then if everybody asks their questions, then you can come back for a second question, just to make sure Rebecca, gets, where she needs to be on time. So the quick question from the chat, what is your all-time favorite book?
It's so hard. It's such a hard question. I'll tell you some things that I love. I mean, I think if I could be stranded with like one book, it would probably be the Harry Potter series because I think it's just the answer to all questions. Like if somebody asks if you could have written one book, it's like, it's definitely Harry Potter. It's the answer to everything. I will say the book that made me fall in love with writing is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So take that for what it is.
Our chat, the person who asked the question, she says the same.
Yay, right?
Awesome. Okay, so go ahead and start raising your hands. I'm going to mute myself, and then we're going to let you guys ask your questions.
Excellent. Right here, gallery. Oh wait. I'm too afraid to hit anything for fear that I'm gonna mess it up. What do you got for me?
Okay, well, oops. Okay, well, if you guys are thinking about it, or if you're just shy, I can pull up some of my questions until you guys get brave.
Get brave, guys, get brave. I apologize, my phone's ringing in the back. It'll be done in a second.
No worries. Okay. So since the concept of this book is in 5 years and having a plan and how close you stay to that plan, have you ever done a 5-year plan? And if so, how close to hitting it exactly did you get?
I always had a plan. I had like very strict ideas about what I wanted for my life and how I thought it was supposed to go. none of it happened. Like truly none of it. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about getting older and realizing that, that old adage, like man plans and God laughs, but there is a lot of real truth in that. And I think that, I think a really beautiful thing is sort of embracing the life that's in front of you. That's clearly, I have a line at the end of this book that says, even after midnight, especially after midnight, which will make sense once you read it, continue moving towards that which is moving towards you. It's the last line of my acknowledgments. And I really believe that. So what I've tried to do in my life is as I've gotten older, sort of like put the plan a little bit more to the side and actually dealt with and engaged with like what was occurring in my life and what was happening. Not just my idea of what should be, but sort of like what was actually there. I thought I was going to live in New York City forever. I had so many ideas about what I wanted for my life, but it wasn't meant to be. It was something else was meant to happen. So yes, I've had many 5-year plans. I don't make them anymore because.
Right. Yeah, my grandfather used to always tell me life is what happens when you make plans.
Yeah.
And I found my life changing drastically, and my acceptance of being in the present changed once I really took that to heart.
Absolutely. And I think we're all really, struggling with that and facing that right now too.
Yeah.
Every plan imaginable has been canceled.
Okay, so it looks like Bonnie has her hand up, so we'll go with Bonnie next, and then I will read Jordan's question for them.
Okay.
So I'll mute myself for Bonnie to be able to ask her question.
Okay. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to say that I've read so far like 3 of your books, and I just love, I guess, to say that how each of your books just touched like so differently on like different aspects of friendship. And did any of your books have to pertain to any like certain your friends or any of your life that you maybe like put into your stories, especially like when you were mine? Like I know kind of like touched on like a lot of like Shakespeare, like Romeo and Juliet, but did any of it like have to do with any of your like your childhood?
Yes, that's such a great question. And I love that you asked it. And I love that you read When You Were Mine. It makes me so happy. That book, yes, especially. That book has a lot to do with sort of more my college friends than my high school friends. I like placed them in high school in that book. But my best friend Melissa had a car named Big Red that's like Charlie's car in that book. There's so many details that are taken out of life. And I wrote When You Were Mine when I was just getting over my first major heartbreak. And the guy that I was with had left me for someone else, like somebody who like was kind of like in our peripheral, like I knew. And so that story was really like born out of so much like immediate heartbreak that I was feeling when I wrote it. And have you read The Dinner List? Yeah. So The Dinner List is probably, I would say, like my most personal book. And that pulls from my whole decade of my 20s living in New York City. Every place that Serena and Tobias go is a place that I loved and frequented. We lived, Melissa and I, the friend I just told you about, lived across the street from the Empire Diner in New York. When we had just first moved to New York when we were like 22. So much of that book, I think, and also like a particular relationship of mine. So a lot of that book really draws on very personal experience. And Melissa is a lot of that the friendship between Sabrina and Jessica in The Dinner List. And as you remember, like it's a relationship with so much love, and it's also complicated. I think it's about 2 young women who are really trying to find their connection when their life is diverging. Like one of them is getting married and having a family, and the other one's trying to figure it out. Like how do you, and I think that's another really interesting question about female friendship. It's like, how do you stay connected when your journeys start to look so different? How do you keep prioritizing each other? So thanks for reading, Bonnie.
Okay, so we have a question from Jordan.
Okay.
And Jordan's question is, was it important that both women, Bella and Danny, be likable, or that one be more likable than the other, or maybe it wasn't a consideration at all? They know that likable isn't a preferred way to describe women, but it's typically used nevertheless.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because it's actually something that I hear not infrequently. And it's something that I think that female novelists or people who are writing female protagonists struggle with a little bit, because like, does every narrator have to be likable, and what does that mean? And I think this does, you know, for lack of a better way to put it, it just comes up less in male fiction, although we don't even call it male fiction, we just call it fiction, but that's a whole other problem and story. It just doesn't really come up that often. And so the reason I think it's an interesting question is it is something that I think about, and it is something that I struggle with. I don't know if Dani is, I think she's very lovable. I don't know if she's particularly likable. Like, she's a very sort of stringent personality who's like hardwired towards one thing, who has very clear objectives. I think things that we might think classically make women unlikable a little bit, that they're not more fluid and pliable. I think when we talk about likability, characters like Bella more come to mind. That being said, I've also tried to write women. I wrote a book about a year ago about a woman, and I'm not sure if anything's going to happen with it, but a woman who like makes a lot of really selfish choices. That I find to be very challenging in fiction, because I think it's still really difficult for us to read women, particularly if you write first person narrative the way I do, and not be able to relate to their choices or to judge their choices. It becomes a harder sell on a book. So I'm still really trying to sort that out in my own fiction. I don't have a clear answer to it, but I love the question because I think about it a lot.
Yeah, it's a difficult sort of thing to balance between writing a character. You know, you can't have a perfect character because that's not how people are. But the standards for women and women characters are much higher, and we tolerate less, you know, deviance from perfection than we would male characters typically. And it's not even conscious sometimes.
No, it's really not. And I think the whole idea of the like unreliable narrator like comes from a very male dominated fiction. And we see it less in female fiction. I mean, I think Gone Girl is a really wonderful example of someone of like a book and an author who's like really trying to push back on that and defy that. Mm-hmm. So, but that's also like a very particular genre, right? So I haven't quite sorted it out, but it's something that I'm always thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's nice to see it, you know, at least being attempted in fiction.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a question from Amanda, and yeah. Amanda asks, what genre is easier or more enjoyable to write in, and is there a genre that you want to try that you haven't yet?
So I really love to read what it is that I write, and I love books that are in the space that I'm currently writing. So I love, you know, it's sort of jumping off the last question we were just discussing, but like, there's all these qualifiers for this genre. It's like women's upmarket literary commercial fiction. I just want to say fiction, but that's what the genre is called. I mean, other people call it like book club fiction, but these are really books that I love to write. And so, so I find it pleasurable to write in this space because number one, it's a space that I love to spend time in as a reader. And number two, it's a space that I also find myself just personally inhabiting. Like as a woman in her 30s who's going through a lot of these experiences, I like to write and reflect. Part of why I write is to figure out how I feel about my own life and how I feel about the things that are occurring in my life. So when I was in my early 20s, I wrote young adult because it was very close to my experience of what I was going through and what that felt like. In terms of like sci-fi or thriller or horror, I don't have an inkling towards that. I'm also because I'm not very good at plot, I don't really know if that would fully work out. Because you have to be like very, very, very good at laying down plot, at really tightly weaving it for those sort of narratives. But I'm relatively young in my career, so never say never. I'm very happy with where I am. I will say, like, I feel this is a very rarefied space to be in, and I feel extremely grateful to get to publish in it, and I feel extremely grateful to all of you for reading these books and allowing me to continue to write them.
It's interesting. So within 5 years, the momentum is Dani falls asleep and she has either a premonition or a dream, and then all of a sudden parts of it start coming true. And I haven't read the dinner list yet, but the premise, if I understood correctly, is That sort of thing where it's like if you could have dinner with, anybody alive or dead, and then all of a sudden this character has that opportunity. So there's a slight bit of magic or kind of genre blending to what you're doing, but it's so grounded in realism that you almost kind of forget that there's something weird going on that we wouldn't actually probably experience necessarily in our lives. But because it's written in such a way that it just feels like, oh, this is how the world works, and these are real people, and this is really going on. So it's kind of really fascinating to see, because usually when you write something with that kind of a premise, you really lean into the magical aspect of it, and you sort of, really go for it. But it's treated so subtly in your works that I'm fascinated.
I sort of grew up as a young writer on magical realist authors. Like Amy Bender was a college professor of mine, and just a short story writer I admired a lot. And the premise on that kind of magical realism is like, we're going to inject this one magical element into this thing, and we're not really going to talk about it. It's easier to assume the conditions in short fiction than it is in a novel. In a novel, you need to have the narrator having a little bit of like reorientation, because you're like setting in for the long haul. But other than that one thing, you're sort of accepting the parameters of the world that we've laid out, and you're moving through it and forward in that. So what happens when you add a magical element is you get to sort of unpack metaphorically in a different way than you would if you were just operating under like the current conditions of the world. Like it just allows you like a little bit of a different scope. And so I really love doing it, and I think that I'll continue to do it for at least the next few books. We'll see. It's a lot of fun to get to play with like the sort of edges of reality, but then also get to like take that one element and bring it into our normal world and business as usual.
I love it. It's perfect. Okay. Any other questions? And we can do repeat questions as well. We're open for that. And then maybe I'll give you guys some time to raise hands or type out questions, and I'll pull one out. Okay. So do you believe in fate? And do you believe things are inevitable, or that we make them happen by focusing on them, either positive or negative, conscious or subconscious?
I don't really know. That's the truth. I don't really know. And I think that my books are always in pursuit of the answer to that question. And because I think it's one of the most interesting questions of the human existence is what is in our control and what isn't. What can we make happen and what can't we? What's going to happen regardless of what we do, and what sort of like unfolds by virtue of like our own design. And I think I'm trying to think if I'd be spoiling anything by expressing this. I don't think so. I think at the end of In 5 Years, it's a little bit of that, right? It's like, did all of this occur because she had that vision and she even subconsciously made it happen? Or was it going to happen even though she fought so hard against it the whole way? And it was going to happen regardless of what she did. So I don't have the answer to that. And I think that I like to say also, like when I finish a book and when it's out in the world, like my guess is as good as yours, meaning like the way I think about it and what I think happens after the book ends is as good as like what you think happens after the book ends. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It's like yours also. So I don't have a definitive answer to that, but it is a question that I'm really interested in exploring, and I think I might possibly explore it forever, because I don't see us coming up with an answer anytime soon.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so question from Amanda is, what are you reading right now?
Hi, Amanda. Let me see if I can find Amanda on here. I don't know. Hi, Amanda. I'm currently reading Gia Tolentino's Trick Mirror, which I just started, which is fascinating. And then I have the 3 books that I've been looking forward to reading for 2 years just arrived. Stray by Stephanie Danler. I don't know if you guys read Sweet Bitter, but I really loved it. My all-time favorite novelist, I think, in this space that I publish in is Emma Straub. So I'm reading All Adults Here. after Stray. I love her. And then Curtis Sittenfeld's Rodham, which I think should be very interesting. I also love her too. Eligible was like one of my favorite books of the last 10 years. So that's on my docket. But right now I'm reading Trick Mirror. Because it's nonfiction, I may sort of read it in between of those novels. I don't know. I haven't quite figured out my strategy yet.
We're in quarantine, so we can read as many books
Exactly.
at the same time as we
I just finished Such a Fun Age, Kylie Reid's book, which I loved. And I read Linda Holmes' Evie Drake Starts Over, which I also loved.
Awesome.
Those are my racks. There's actually been a tremendous amount of great books published in the last few months.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and
Yeah,
there's more coming out soon, and it's just like, okay,
it's a really big spring. It's been a really big spring for books.
Absolutely. Okay, so Jordan has another question, and
Jordan.
they're asking, so Danny Voss describes her as being a gut lawyer. Do you have an explanation as to why Danny was able to use her gut in her professional life less than in her personal? Or maybe she was aware of it in her personal and just didn't act on it? And also, is using your gut versus not using your gut similar to your theme of love being a thing of the present right now, or rather than the future?
I love that. Thanks, Jordan. So I think that Danny doesn't really know that she's a gut lawyer. I think Danny thinks that she makes all of her decisions, professional and personal, from like a very logical point of view. It's like, here are all the facts, here's my pro-con list, here's the information, and then I'm going to choose based off of all of that. I think it's only in going what she goes through, again, we'll keep it spoiler free, that she begins to understand that there's like a different mode of operating, that there's another form of intelligence she has, that there's something else at her disposal, and perhaps has been at her disposal that whole time, she just hasn't recognized it. So when her boss says that to her, wherever they are, in California, I think, when he says that to her, it's sort of surprising to her because she doesn't really see herself that way. Now, Bella, on the other hand, is somebody who is all gut. She's never made a list in her life. And I think Danny's journey in a lot of ways over the course of the book is to sort of become more like Bella, to like embrace the Bella within her. And that's Bella's role in her life, is to get her to do that. And the experience of what they go through allows her to do that. So I hope that answered the question, Jordan.
Okay, let's see. Give some folks some time to type up some questions or raise their hands. In the meantime,
how many hours a day do I see? Now I've just opened it.
Okay, so the question is, how many hours a day do you spend writing when you are working on a book?
So I don't go by hours. I go by word count. So it really varies. So some days it takes me hold on one second. So some days it takes me 2 hours to write. So every day I write 2,000 words that I'm actively writing. And by every day, I mean, I try to do 4 days a week, because one weekend day inevitably is something else is going to happen. And then the weekends are what the weekends are. So I tend to write 2,000 words a day when I'm writing. And sometimes that'll take 2 hours or an hour and a half. And more likely than not, it takes about 4. Sometimes it'll take 6. It just depends on what mood I'm in, what scene I'm writing, whether I have any type of sense of what I'm actually trying to accomplish, right? Like there are some days where I get to the computer and I've just from the prior day understood, like, okay, I know exactly what the upcoming scene is. There are other days I get to the computer and I think I have absolutely no idea what's supposed to happen now. I don't know where she's supposed to go, what she's supposed to be uncovering. Like I don't know what happens until I get to like this point, but that point's 10,000 words away, I think. So who knows? So it varies, but I think most writers will probably tell you that they follow a word count a day. Some writers it's 1,000, some writers it's 2, some writers have far larger word counts, because we have phones and the internet. So our counts don't really work. It has to be words.
So do you write chronologically, or do you, if you're really stuck on a scene, do you maybe go somewhere else in the story and work there for a little while and hope something kind of, comes into place in that other section?
I've done it before, but I don't usually do it. I usually write chronologically because what ultimately, what skipping around ultimately is just jumping to the parts of the book that are fun to write. So it's not a great idea, because then when you get there, you've already written all the fun bits. And then also sometimes when you get there, what you've written is not quite right. It doesn't quite fall, because what's come before it looks different. And so what you've written needs to be changed and altered too. So I don't usually do it because to me, it doesn't seem to work. If I were a writer who plotted exactly and knew every detail of their work, I could understand why writing out of order would make perfect sense, because the scenes aren't going to change. But for me, the scenes constantly change. Like what I imagine is coming constantly evolves, because I don't write with that much of a plan.
Makes sense, definitely. Okay, so I went through all my questions. Does anybody else have?
Anybody else want to ask us something? I'm trying to go down my list here. I see Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie. Oh, there's Jordan. Hi, Jordan.
Okay, let's see. Let me think here. So you mentioned that you're working on something right now. I'm sure you won't tell us much, but do you have any kind of teasers for us?
It is, it has some magic in it, is what I will say.
Okay.
It has some magic in it, and it is also like my other books, about a romantic relationship and also another kind of relationship. I won't say more than that, but there's a different love story in it as well. And it's really honestly been like a delight to write. I'm very, very excited to share it with my agent and editor, and then all of you whenever that may be.
It's exciting. So do you think you're going to stay with novels for the most part, or do you think you're going to try to go back into television writing a little bit?
I'm always sort of going back and forth. I think that novels are really my first love, and I do not ever see myself like departing from that, but I would love to move in and out of television. I'm sort of working on adapting The Dinner List for film. So I'd like to both play with other people's work and also my own, and keep like moving back and forth.
Awesome. Okay. Jordan asks, have you started selling the artwork, and did you come up with it? It's in the first few pages. So let me see if I can pull up an example here.
Do you mean the cover?
So my copy doesn't have any illustrations in it, so my copy won't be so helpful there. Although I did notice
art on the wall. Oh, do you mean, sorry, Jordan, do you mean the painting that's in the apartment?
That Bella got for me.
Oh yes, that's so that's an actual piece of art that's by like a very famous, I think like maybe Swedish artist named Alan Gubresnik. So that's an actual print that exists. It's not mine to tamper with. But I will say they only made, I think he made 1,200 prints, and I've had a Google alert set for it forever, for like 10 years, for one of them becomes available, because I'm like desperate to own this thing. I really want it. This will not be spoiling anything, but if any of you haven't finished the book, there's a print that Danny had that's in that apartment that she lives in that hour, that says, "I was young, I needed the money," which I love. And I've never been able to find one, but yes, like it's already, you can go on Etsy and you can find copies of it. I would like the real one, but I don't know where it is.
No, I did notice, kind of while I was going around in the internet, the copy I have here of the cover is blue font, but then it looks like there's a pink font version as well.
It's the UK version.
Got you. Okay, I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah, so the UK usually does different covers. This time they decided to use basically the same cover, but they changed up the font. It's always interesting to see, we were actually chatting a little bit about this in the beginning, but how different territories see their marketplaces. The UK covers always look different than the US covers, because they have, it's a different marketplace. But I'm so thrilled that they decided to use the same cover, and I think the pink is fun. But yes, it's the UK.
Okay, perfect. That explains that. I was like, wait, did I have a different edition?
Yeah, yeah, no.
Awesome. Okay. So we got a raised hand.
I just had a question about the end of the story. I don't want to give anything away, but when you were writing it, did you feel like you were going one way or a different way to how Danny's life, I guess, who she would pick or how her life would end in the story?
Yeah. Very like way to like avoid the corners there, Bonnie. That was good. I I I knew the thing that happens would have to happen. And I was trying to sort of avoid it because I really kind of just wanted to maybe try to figure out a way for it to not. But ultimately, when I started writing, I understood that that was what would have to happen in order to like bring about this change that needs to occur. I also sort of knew that I knew that like what you thought might happen between these people does not.
Right.
The final section, and I won't get into anything more than this, was a little bit surprising to me. And I think that the endings to my books, I like to say that I love a happy ending, but not a finished ending. So
Right.
I like endings that feel hopeful and joyful, but and make us feel like things are going to be okay, but that don't give us all the answers.
Right.
So yes and no. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay. Let's see. Last call for questions. Okay. So do you have a particular author who has been an inspiration to you?
I feel like all authors whose books I love are inspirations, because it's just so hard to make anything that is compelling and real and reads well. It's such a challenging thing to do. My professor in college was a woman named Marianne Wiggins, who wrote a book called Evidence of Things Unseen. She's written many books. Her books were nominated for the Pulitzer and the National Book Award. And her book Evidence of Things Unseen is really profound. And she wrote a book called John Dollar that was really excellent also. I admire her very much. But in terms of careers, I think that I'm most interested in having just the one that belongs to me. I don't think that I emulate anyone's career by any means, but there are certainly novelists that I love, that I follow, Emma Shaw being one of them. There's a woman named Adele Waldman who wrote a book called The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. That's one of my favorite books of the last 10 years, and I'm desperate for her to write another one. So I admire talent, and I also admire writers who take their writing seriously, who find joy in it. Like that I find inspiring.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see, one moment. Let's see if we get some more questions. So what have you for we're all in quarantine, we're all kind of trying to fill the day and kind of stick to routines, but yet kind of break our routines so we don't get too bored. So how has that been for you, and has that impacted your writing process at all? Has it impacted your creativity? Do you get like writer's block because of it? Or
I have been lucky. So all of this started while I was on book tour. And so the second half, really mostly all of my book tour was canceled. I did 3 cities and then flew home from Boston. So it was all kind of just happening in real time. And I think when I got back, I needed a few weeks to just sort of like sort through what was happening. I was also doing a tremendous amount of like, book clubs, and all the promotional things that I was meant to do on tour were transitioned online. So just sort of sorting that out. It was a really kind of like heady period of like 3 weeks. and then I began to write again, which is I always find to be very soothing and calming. And it's been really wonderful to have a new book to work on and to write during this time. I have found that it's been just very helpful for me. So, and my process has not changed, happily. So I have been, I've been pretty like busy writing, and as you can see, I'm here in California, so there's lots of fresh air and outside space, which is so nice. But hanging in there. I hope all of you are doing the same.
I think we're all doing okay. I think it's a fun time to be a reader and a library worker or a librarian or a patron, because we're all doing things kind of differently than we might have before.
Yeah.
So we're doing events like this where, a small library like us, maybe never in a million years would we have been able to talk to an author the way we're talking to you. So that's been really kind of an unexpected silver lining to be able to do programming like this.
I'm so happy to be here with you guys. I love that. I love that mentality.
Okay, well, I think we're at 4:23, and I don't see any more questions, so I think that might wrap it up.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you all so much for being here and for asking me your questions and for supporting my books. You can find me on my website. I just want to shout out really quickly, RebeccaSerle.com has a tremendous amount of resources for both the Dinner List and In 5 Years. So if you want to read the Dinner List after you read In 5 Years, there's like book clubs, there's recipes, there's just all sorts of, we worked really, really hard to make these like book club packets. So if you want to check that out, it's RebeccaSerle.com. I also have a newsletter that I do extremely infrequently. So if you want to sign up for that, and then I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and you can chat me there if you finish. For those of you who haven't finished the book, if you finish and you want to ask me some questions, I'm around there, and I do a lot of like Q&As, and I'll do some like Instagram lives there. So if you finish and want to ask me, come on and get your questions answered over there.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, we're going to be hopefully going through the holds on our online ebook service, audiobook service, so people can start reading it. And we'll encourage everybody to kind of slide into your Twitter mentions and your Instagram mentions, and ask you what they think they can.
Yeah. Ask me away. I usually do like a question tab on Sundays. Sunday questions. So that is it. If you have questions for me, by the way, not just about In 5 Years, the Dinner List, but about writing or process, feel free to come over there and ask me. DMs, I don't check. So don't DM me because I won't answer those. But on the question tab, they go up honestly minimum once a week. So you'll find a way to be able to chat with me.
Awesome. That's great. I love it. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We really do appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys. Everyone stay safe and healthy, and keep reading.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.